it's almost like the climax of the song or the music, the piece is typically like, what do they call it? The golden rule, or the golden. It's not the golden rule. It's the golden something, where it's like 2/3 of the way through is roughly the climax, or thereabouts, in any
Mhm.
proper piece of classical music, or really even in pop music today, or most music. It's not the golden hour. It's the golden something. The golden. I don't know. Look it up. It's a Mozart thing, I think. Mozart golden ratio. Golden ratio. Okay, the Fibonacci sequence. I guess it's something to do with that. The golden ratio is 1.618, the divine proportion. Let me share this with you guys. I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about, other than that I learned it in music school. Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, yes, the Fibonacci sequence in music. 8 divided by 13 equals. Oh my god. Mozart. Piano sonatas. Okay. I have no idea, but I I don't know that I would use this exactly to write music, but it's something about how long the length is in reference to the climax of the music. I guess in composition of art, I don't know, Julia, you would be much more able to talk about something like this than me, but does that
I
make
mean, I
sense
could
to
definitely
you?
talk about the golden ratio in terms of proportion and composition for art for sure. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a way to keep things more dynamic and not a static feeling. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole thing we do in school too. We did in school.
So you did it in art school as well.
Yeah, yeah, we took a look at it. I mean, it didn't dominate many courses, but it was just a, yeah, here's something you want to keep in mind in terms of composition, where to put stuff in the frame to give focus, and how to give variety, how to make the eye move around
Hmm.
the composition in a nice way. You don't want it to just be in one place. There should be a focus and then some secondary stuff, and you want the eye to travel.
And is that something that you're conscious of when composing art?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, well, I think
In your case, visual art, obviously.
it depends. I mean, if you're just drawing something from life, then you might not be thinking about it. But for instance, when I was doing a lot of editorial illustration, a lot of it was like visual concepts. So your visual concept, you might have a main idea of what you're trying to convey, and then you'd have secondary ideas that might have secondary importance or something like that. So yeah, for me, I definitely did think about it a lot in terms of how an image was read. But yeah, I mean, if it's like a landscape or something, you will still think about it. But if you're going from just accuracy and realism, might not think of it in the same way.
Right. Interesting. I mean, I haven't studied it that much. I guess probably it's more applicable to artwork now than maybe it is to music, but I do think of of kind of the overall structure of music, but I don't know if it's conscious at this point. I think it
Mm.
just occurs naturally. Not to go back to my song structure thing, but I've been working on that more, and I probably will eventually post some things on my Instagram about it, um, where we delve more deeply into song structure. But I think the song structure really, even though it's songs, it applies to a lot of different uh, things, including video games. Like, a song structure is just kind of a blueprint in a way. Um, and people often say that, oh, there's a hit song formula. There's really not, based on the study I've done. There is elements that apply in those songs, but each song will will approach things differently. You know what I mean? Like, they'll have different little twists and turns.
Hmm.
So we are doing an EGA game, but there are twists and turns to the EGA game. It's not just like there's one cookie cutter way to do it. Influenced by an art style from 1989, but there's also updates, or not just the game, just I'm just talking about trying to specifically talk about the art, but there's, obviously the tools you have to work with are probably 1,000 times better than what they had to work with in 1989. And
Oh, for
probably in
sure.
some ways,
It's a little-
uh-oh, we froze. Julia froze and my stream is off.
Uh-oh.
Oh, are we back there? Okay,
Uh-oh.
we had a little hiccup there, I see.
Okay.
We just dropped 277 frames. How
Whoa.
about that? The ratio of you guys are way smarter than me, so you know. The Fibonacci sequence is the solution to at least 3 adventure game puzzles, which if you know about 3, then I'm sure it's way more than that. Um, Eden Waith. But yeah, that's kind of the way I think about, in a way I think about music specifically. I try to think in general terms, I guess, abstract terms, as opposed to like rules, hard and fast rules. The guidelines are just things that I use as tools to get me to an endpoint. Otherwise, I think like anything that's creative, there's no ending to it. Like when you finish a piece of art, do you always feel like, I still could do X, Y, and Z? Is that a
Yeah,
thing?
that's the secret.
Yeah.
That's really the secret, knowing when to stop.
Right.
Although that part can be taken out of your hands if you're working towards someone's deadline, where they're like, okay, this has to go to press by 5 o'clock tonight, so you're done at whatever you would at whatever point you reached. You're done at that time. So that's kind of good. It's good and bad, but it's good in that, yeah, okay, well, I have to stop now. But on something, if it's self-directed work like my own personal pieces, or even something like this game where I don't really have a fixed deadline, that can be a bit troublesome and tricky, because you can easily say, I'm going to work 2 nights on this bug about dumping water in a bathtub that no one's going to see. And yeah, I mean, it's a matter of, yeah, I can keep adding and picking at stuff and improving stuff forever, but it's a matter of trying to figure out how much is enough, and then trying to finish something. With any type of art. I mean, you're probably the same way with music, or you can just keep fiddling with it.
Identical. Identical.
Yes.
And I see that mostly in students that I'm working with, or new artists or new producers or new engineers or whatever. You don't have an infinite amount of time.
Yep.
And I think as a student or a younger person, we often did, especially, we're at home living with our family or whatever, parents, grandparents, whoever. And we're like, oh, yeah, we have all the time in the world because, we're not paying rent and keeping our light bills and things like that. Real artistship. Yeah, exactly. And additionally, when you get into a professional environment, there are deadlines, even if you're self directed. Or you quickly realize that your art, as you are currently approaching it, is not sustainable because you have these deadlines. You don't have these deadlines, so you can keep working on it. And hence, somebody will work on something for 10 plus years. I don't think that's, generally speaking, a realistic amount of time, unless you're building, a 50-story building, or you're building, some of the great pyramids of Egypt or something, then maybe. But you have to figure out how to effectively accomplish a task that's in front of you. And
Yep.
sometimes just identifying the really stupid and simple things is what gets you to where you need to go. So I try to get that. I notice it with my students all the time. They're not able to finish songs for various reasons, but a lot of it is just, do they have the tools to understand what they need to do in order to get to a finishing point? Now, once they get to that point, if they're like, oh, I want to keep working on it, I get it. But I think a lot of times they need help. And we've talked about this a little bit. I've talked about it on my Twitter, where people were talking about writer's block. And do you get writer's block? And I think it's a little different for people writing words and text. But with music, I don't really think there's much of an excuse to have writer's block, unless you've been writing for, like months on end, and you're just like, oh my God, I can't write one more thing. Well, then you just need a break. But otherwise, there's a lot of tools to use to prevent you from having those issues. I don't know if you can do that so much with words or art other than deadlines.
Well, in terms of overworking art, I mean, there's actual physical danger when you're working non-digitally. So if you're working on a watercolor painting or something, you can overwork it to the point where you can't reverse what you've just done. Um, so that's another aspect that's really not there for music is you can physically overwork something to the point where you've destroyed it irrevocably or irrevocably, however you pronounce it.
Well,
Other type
I
of
like
painting
what
is more
Cosmic Void just said. Does that apply to you?
once you've written for tens of thousands of hours or more, trust me, you won't experience writer's block again. Um, but that's not really writing; it's more like logistics.
Logistics, but I think logistics and understanding that is how you kind of can get through the
That's
process.
true.
So you
Yep.
set it up like a process.
Yep.
So what Franz Schubert, Dan just called you out on. Didn't he die during the writing of the Unfinished Symphony? Isn't that why it was unfinished? I think that's why. I'm not sure. But yeah, that if you have a process of how to approach it, that's what I want to instill with
Hmm.
people who are learning to compose music or write songs or
Hmm.
whatever, is that if you follow a process, you can get from a start point to an end point, like anything, approaching it in small steps. No, he wrote two movements and then died 6 years later. Well, you don't know what happened in those last 6 years. Robert Schumann really suffered his end of life. He was being treated with mercury for syphilis. That's not too cool. I don't think they use mercury as a treatment for anything these days. But anyway, um, yeah, to have that process and to have it refined and broken down into stupidly simple steps that anybody could follow, like my dog could follow. I don't have a dog, but if I did, they could follow it, you know? Like just something as simple as starting with a tempo or knowing that I need to start like this kind of doesn't have a tempo. It does have a tempo, a pulse, but it doesn't have a time signature. I was counting along when I played this last little stinger piece, and I was counting along, and it's really, really wild. Like there's a bar of 13, a bar of 6, a bar of 7, a bar of 5. It was pretty weird. So anyway, yeah. So just having those little pieces of the process to like hints almost or steps that you follow to get like how do we get to the next step because we're stuck here. How do we get to the next step? Okay, this needs this needs that. How do you know all that stuff? And I'm in the process of trying to put all that together into words so that I can help somebody do it as opposed to just you need me to be there, I'd rather not have to be there every time somebody is trying to write a song effectively and get a piece composed effectively.